Um, Great, thank you, Hel. My name is Helena. I am one of the coordinators for the Seed Sovereignty Programme. I cover the southeast of England, and we are working as a programme to build a more just and resilient seed system by providing training, resources, networking, and events to both commercial and community growers across the UK and Ireland. Tonight, we're unpacking a topic particularly close to my heart, because so rarely when we think of seed sovereignty, do we think of urban spaces. Yet some of the most creative and skilled growers I know are living in cities. And growing in cities can face particular challenges and opportunities. And I hope that tonight is an opportunity to unpack some of this together. And I'm really thrilled to be joined by Dee, Richard and Rowan, who are all doing amazing work in this space. And I'll introduce you all more fully after the film, perhaps. Yeah, I'd like to begin with a short film, which some of you might have seen before, which I hope frames our discussion a bit. This was shot by the wonderful Andy Pillsbury as part of a series of short films he's making on seed producers and their stories from across the UK and Ireland. And he came down to London last autumn to join us on a journey through different growing spaces to meet some of the people, spaces and seeds which make up the London Freedom Seed Bank. And it's only about 8 minutes long, but I thought it might be quite a nice starter for tonight. Hal, would you like to set it up for us, please? When we think about crop diversity, we very rarely think of urban spaces. We generally think about seed sovereignty as a rural movement. And I think there is something really exciting and powerful about imagining and building that in an urban context. And that the urban context offers us opportunities that many rural spaces don't have. London is a metropolis full of many different people with many different backgrounds and experiences, and I think that is reflected in the type of food that is being grown here and the type of seeds that are being saved here.
I got seeds from my dad, like tomato seeds, basil seeds, and cucumber seeds. My Mama Dolly's pumpkin tomato seeds, they come from my dad, and he got them from his mom. When I touch the soil and when I dig, when I plant, I feel I am in my childhood, or I am in my country.
As soon as you start saving seed, then you realise you've got more seed on your hands than you know what to do with. So you need to find people to start sharing it with. And that's a great way into a group of people in London who are all doing their own thing on allotments or in gardens, saving their own seed and also looking for people to share it with.
We need to be in community because we can't all save the same things because we don't have enough space or we don't have the right conditions. So a network like, London Freedom Seed Bank is really, really important in terms of collecting different seeds and building that seed resilience for London. And, seed sovereignty, seed resilience underlies our food sovereignty and food resilience.
The London Freedom Seed Bank is a network of growers and gardeners who are collectively dedicated to saving and storing open pollinated seed in London. We have a network of about 72 growers who are in allotments, in community gardens, in schools, saving open pollinated seed from primarily vegetables but also some flowers. And we have had over 120 different varieties in the seed bank since we began in 2012. And so these are all varieties that have been grown in London. So the idea is that over generations they become even more adapted to our local growing conditions and our local soils, and so are particularly well suited for growing food here.
I was pretty surprised, to be honest, that the crops that we seed save, like, noticeably are more resilient than commercial seed that I bought. And I guess that's because you've necessarily chosen the ones that have done well, right? So yeah, I'm convinced that the plants through that process are getting stronger.
They're really valuable, these seeds, and as we face increasing climate uncertainty, as we've, seen so clearly over the past three to 5 years, our food security is, profoundly threatened. And suddenly this small collection of seeds that we have becomes extremely valuable, because a lot of them have been saved in London for maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe even 10 years now, and are actually acclimatised to our conditions here. And I'm suddenly amazed and humbled by the importance of this little collection of seeds that we have, and that one day people might actually need them, which is as frightening as it is exciting.
We need to think of 7 generations. So how are we producing a resilient food system? We need to have access to seed. And the issues with seed in the UK generally is that we don't produce most of our seed here. And it's important that we have seed that is acclimatized for this particular region.
I think what is important about people growing, saving and exchanging open pollinated seed is that we are collectively looking after and holding our seed diversity, that it is a perhaps in some ways quiet but powerful act of resistance to a corporate seed regime that's dominated by a select few companies. And in the daily tending to our gardens and collecting and cleaning and saving and exchanging seed with each other, such that we are no longer having to buy from these companies, we are challenging that system of domination. Because the reality is that most people across the UK and Ireland live in cities, and so what happens in urban areas matters.
It's amazing how they're all so similar, just a little different.
Yeah.
Oh right,
They're
and
nice
that
too.
one we spoke about quite a lot, didn't we? Because there was the colour variation. And
Which one's that?
Dragon's Tongue from Patrick.
right, I grew those as well.
Did you have mainly dark ones or mainly light ones?
I can't remember. It was quite a few years ago now, but yeah, we were trying to work out whether they should be, whether the darker ones are mutation or whether that was the natural way of the seed, whether it had fairer and darker ones. I don't think we came to any conclusion, did we? I think we're letting them both stay in anyway.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you, Hel. Yeah, I hope that film provides a sort of start point for some of the discussions I hope we have tonight. I think it introduces, gosh, we struggled so much to condense all of this to an 8-minute film. Hal can confirm. We spent months and months going back and forth because you could just do hours and hours of filming this, and with these with the folks that you saw in the film, I mean, the interviews were brilliant, right? There was so much good content and so many different threads to go down. And I guess that was the start point of this event tonight, to try and make a bit more room for some of the things that we weren't able to cover there. And so I'm really chuffed to be joined by 3 folks who are doing really brilliant work working with seed in cities. Some you'll recognise from the film. Dee Woods is a food and farming actionist, knowledge broker and pollinator, weaving together the different strands of food and life. Dee advocates for good food for all and a just, equitable food system, challenging the systemic barriers that impact marginalised communities and food producers. Dee's work sits at the nexus of food sovereignty, agroecology, justice, human rights, participatory policymaking, decolonial research, community, cultural practice, spirituality, abolition, and liberation. So covering quite a lot of bases. And she also works at the Granville Community Kitchen, which you see in the film. Rowan Lear is an artist, writer, and garden plotter. Since 2019, Rowan has taken care of the Glasgow Seed Library, a collection of seeds and community of growers across the city. Rowan is interested in vegetal life, collective working, and helping plants and people flourish. And finally, we're joined by Richard Galpin, who's on the steering group of the London Freedom Seed Bank. He lives and works and breeds lettuce in Woolworth, South London. His involvement in local networks and projects include the Alberta Fruit Commons, the Woolworth Community Gardening Network, and the Woolworth Neighbourhood Food Model. Hello all, and thanks for joining us. I wonder whether whether the rest of you would like to introduce yourselves on the chat. It would be really lovely. I recognise some of these faces, but it would be really lovely to get a sense of who's joining us here today and where you're joining from as well. There is so much brilliant work happening in this space across the UK and Ireland, and it'd be really lovely to meet you all. And as I mentioned, this is really meant as a discussion for us all. So if you have, we've got a particular section sort of later on in the evening for questions from you all and sharing your experiences, but perhaps if you'd like to pop them in the chat throughout as they come up, we can sort of try to gather them together. Great. Well, I wonder whether, since we've already met the London Freedom Seed Bank in the film, whether we could begin with you, Rowan, if you could give us perhaps a little bit of an introduction to the Glasgow Seed Library and your work there, and perhaps the sort of motivations initially in forming.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the introduction and for the invitation to be here. It's really nice. It's also quite nice to be in a room of people growing seeds in urban spaces, because I think that doesn't happen that often. A lot of the spaces that I'm in are seed savers, seed producers growing outside the city. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to kind of compare notes and think about common problems and common opportunities, I guess, as well. So yeah, to introduce Glasgow Seed Library, it began in 2019, so I still consider it quite a baby. It's just taking its toddling steps now. I've been involved since 2019, but I wasn't there right at the inception. But yeah, I guess it's been growing with me, and I've been growing with it. It started initially, I think, as a kind of build it and they will come kind of project. So we began with a cabinet of seeds, really beautifully sourced seeds from various seed producers around the UK. And I guess the idea was people were going to come and borrow seeds and grow them and save them and return the seed, and it would become a kind of self-fulfilling project, which is still the plan. But I think when I became involved, it felt quite quickly like we were starting with a particular set of, I don't want to say problems, but challenges, which were interesting, useful, and I think very productive challenges. And the first is that it emerged out of an art institution called Centre for Contemporary Arts in Glasgow, which had been doing a variety of kind of really exciting projects, particularly working on food culture around the city, working with artists interested in ecology and various forms of earth care. And it also came out of a sort of programme of open access. So the building that CCA is in, various things were happening to make that building more accessible to the public. So we had things like a publication studio, which had been set up for anyone to come and access and create publications. We also have an open access policy for the venue itself. So if you want to put on a film screening, if you want to put on an event or a workshop, that should be possible to do. It's not kind of preventing gatekeeping a little bit, I guess, and trying to open up the space. So the Seed Library came out of that general vibe. But one of the, I'd say one of the significant problems is that we started with a Seed Library. We ourselves didn't have any land. There wasn't any growing space around the CCA. It's very urban, as in, yeah, we don't have any green. So it's like, wow, this is interesting. Also thinking about urban spaces, we were in a particularly polluted part of the city as well, where I think a lot of the city is quite polluted, but just where we are for some reason there's a lot of pollution, so we badly need greening in that area. Another thing was that it was coming out of a space where there was a lot of interest and passion for seed sovereignty, the kind of ideas that are behind it, and a great interest in food sovereignty as well, but definitely not the skills in seed saving, and maybe even quite limited skills in growing food as well. So I guess one of the first things we did was it forced us to very quickly connect with other people around the city. And I think it's something that I've repeated when other people have asked me about setting up seed libraries and seed projects. It's like, look at what's happening already, like look at the ground around your feet, like what things are already happening, what projects can you connect with or collaborate with. So we started working with a group of people, mostly from community gardens, from allotment associations, and various kind of other organisations around the city, and just growers who are really passionate about seed saving. And I guess the idea was that we kind of together collectively formed this like really interesting, I guess, skills, like range of skills, diversity of interests and approaches and experiences. And that really was, I would say that was the beginning of the Seed Library, is getting those people into a room when we could be in a room. And I really like just starting to imagine and dream of what could a Seed Library be, and what does a Seed Library look like in Glasgow with all the things that, you know, all the challenges that people might face in saving seed. So I can talk more about this, but maybe like I should stop talking at the moment, and we can hear from someone else. But yeah, I can talk more about the different things that we've done to establish the Seed Library.
That's really interesting, and I really agree with the point you made early on about not having been in a specifically urban, like a space for urban seed savers or urban seed networks, other than ones that we've done with the Freedom Seed Bank. Or there are urban growing sort of spaces and networks and so on for urban growers, but not so much spaces for urban seed savers or seed groups, which is why I feel particularly excited about the group gathered here today. Thank you, Rowan, for sharing that. Richard, do you resonate with any of that? I mean, I know you weren't part of the Freedom Seed Bank from right at the beginning, but you've been there for several years now. Any of the sort of challenges and opportunities that Rowan mentioned, do they ring any bells?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, it was interesting that she mentioned limited skills, because I was just trying to think before the call started about the sort of differences between urban and and rural seed banks potentially, or seed networks. And I think I kind of assumed that, yeah, we would have more limited skills in an urban area. And that might just be because, you know, the growers that I know from outer London have more space and land, and so seem like really competent growers. But obviously, you know, we have a lot of strengths as well. And I think for me, there's something about the kind of the role that the seed network plays in compensating for the challenges of urban growing. You know, it's bloody tough, right? Growing in London soil, which is, you know, clay if you're lucky, and mostly rubble. And the challenges of the, you know, pests and, you know, the lack of space and the general environment, that for me, the London, you know, the kind of seed networks are about kind of slightly kind of recharging your activism in a way, and meeting other kind of like-minded growers who you know are really serious and kind of really, really committed. You know, kind of, we spend a lot of time in some of the community networks doing stuff where you're trying to share knowledge, which is really, really valuable. And, you know, always make time for, you know, my neighbour who's been down to B&Q and bought a plant and wants to know how often to water it. But to have the chance to really talk, you know, when somebody comes and asks about seed saving, you know that they're kind of moving to the next level. Well, I don't want to suggest that, you know, it's a kind of necessarily advanced way to start with seed saving if you're starting growing, but you know, it opens up into a different kind of space of conversation. And I think, yeah, it kind of reminds you of going to the Toll Paddle Festival many years ago, and turning up and sort of realising that lots of unionists, people who had joined unions, setting up stalls for other people who were already members of unions. Like, what's going on? Everyone's just talking to themselves. And Billy Bragg came on stage and said it really well. He's like, this is where we come to recharge our activism. You know, this is the kind of space that we come to kind of like support each other, then go back and do our good work. And for me, seed saving is a little bit like that. It's a space for me where not only the people in the networks kind of, but also the kind of abundance of it, because you get so, because getting food out of the ground is hard, but getting seed is relatively easy, and you can get so much of it so quickly. So it reminds you that the abundance of seed is something that you can then, you know, be generous with. So yeah, sorry, I rambled into a kind of personal reflection there on what makes me want to do it. But yeah, that's probably enough for me for now as well.
Ramblings are so welcome. Yeah, I think particularly the abundance of seed, it forces you into a kind of gift economy, like a micro gift economy, because you've got so much that you need to do something with it, and then it's so often gifted, and make the best gifts, in my very biased opinion. And yeah, and so I think it is quietly very powerful, actually, particularly when we link up in groups. I think there's a possibility, and Dee, you articulated that very beautifully in the film. The real power for it, for me, comes from linking up in networks. It's in many ways quite an individual activity, the practice of seed saving, but the like political power comes when we come together. I think particularly in urban spaces, because yeah, I guess space is, for me, I think the big constraint, right? So few folks have access to their own like private gardens in cities, or if they do, they're very small, or they're growing on balconies or whatever. But if we each commit perhaps to saving one variety, together, we've got like 20 or 30 or 100 or whatever, and could potentially meet all of our needs as growers in terms of seed. And that's quite a big sort of disconnecting from quite a problematic seed regime in my mind. Dee, we've had many conversations in the past, and in one of them, or in several of them, you've spoken about your plans to set up a seed library for African and Caribbean heritage foods, with the intention of providing culturally appropriate food for urban communities. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that about where you're at with that, and yeah, what your hopes are.
Okay, I think that came about for me because of my understanding about how our sort of food was, and our connection to plants and to land was interrupted by enslavement and by colonialism. So we're now in a situation where our health is suffering. We have high rates of lifestyle diseases because we're not eating our culturally appropriate foods. We have generations of people who are disconnected from older people, so they don't have that knowledge anymore about the seed, about the land, about the foods and how to prepare them. So for me, it is extremely important to be saving those seeds, gathering those seeds, preserving those seeds. Preservation is important. So it's not just about being a library and sharing that within the community. It's about preserving culture and foodways, and yeah, for me that's part of agroecology for me, and food sovereignty. So that's what I'm doing. Listening to people. I've listened to a lot of stories. I've always sat at the feet of older people, and listening to their stories, and collecting seeds, and I'm growing, and I'm saving and redistributing, and eventually it'll be big enough, that I could open it up wider. And I was greatly inspired by the late Isaiah Levy, who was a friend, and his seed ship. So as well. So that's what I'll be doing.
Beautiful. It's really beautiful also to see how alive his legacy is in London. How many folks are growing out varieties that they originally got from Isaiah, and so it's nice to see how that journey continues, and how his story is told also as part of that. I suspect that many of those saving seed in cities are first, second, or third generation migrants and members of diaspora communities saving varieties that are culturally significant to culinary practices from around the world. I think because they're otherwise quite difficult to get your hands on, as Dee mentioned. And also because in many other parts of the world, the practices of saving seed are far more established still, like you spoke about this sort of intergenerational disconnection. And I think we really see that in seed saving, where in my parents' and grandparents' generation, that was far more like common sense, like if you're growing food, you're saving seed, and something has happened in that time that has, I think separated us from that. But for me, like a real excitement of urban seed saving is that I think these migrant communities are posing a quiet but really powerful challenge to quite pervasive narratives of Britishness, and that have pervaded much political and also horticultural spheres in recent years. And I think, as Dee mentioned, it's a real invitation to interrogate the colonial legacies of our food, but also offer a celebration of the diversity of urban life. It's a way of platforming and celebrating the range of food cultures present in cities. And I wonder if any of you see that in the organizations that you work in, or have ideas about the role that seed could play in building more equitable food systems. That's a huge question, and you can take that in whichever way you'd like.
I could say a little bit about our work with our seed library artist and researcher in residence we have at the moment, who's called Desiree Coral, who we just started working with us in January, so it's quite recent. But specifically looking at what she's calling colonial seeds, and she has been kind of doing archival research, looking at the seeds that we have in the library, so some which are donated, some of which we bought, and then tracing kind of the various trajectories of those seeds from different parts of the world, and they're really quite complicated and complex histories of how they got here and how they became the kind of vegetables that we know really well today. And so we just last week we had a kind of just sharing discussion session where we talked about tomatoes. Desiree's from Ecuador, so she's particularly interested in South American, I guess, vegetables that have a South American origin. So that, I guess, and we're going to be looking at quinoa next month, actually, which will be interesting, which is also something we have in a seed library. But I guess it's been super interesting for us because it's also like, I think somebody mentioned taking time. I think it was Dee talking about listening to stories and kind of taking time to, like, I don't know what the word would be, not reassimilate, but to reabsorb some of this knowledge that we've lost. And I think our work with Desiree is also a way of being able to do that as a kind of seed library community, to kind of remember in some ways these sort of knowledges we've lost, which include like often quite troubling, violent, disturbing, or like just weird ways that the things that we eat have formed us, and where they've come from and how they got here. And I think, yeah, we're definitely going to maybe always be in that process of remembering and re-listening to stories, and as well as, yeah, looking at archival materials is also listening to people who maybe have some of that memory still having been passed down in stories and storytelling. And I would say stories has been also very significant way, in different ways, that we have like been thinking about seeds as well, like imagining each seed itself as this little story of genetic information that is like passed down through the generations, and then the stories that people tell about seeds like also kind of surrounding the seed in some way, and trying to like reconnect those things together. So yeah, I guess all I was saying is that it's on our minds, and yeah, like you mentioned, I think it's very, for me, the notion of a kind of British seed is quite funny. And yeah, I'm much more interested in the idea of seeds having always moved and always been moving, and it's just looking at the intricacies of how those movements have happened, and who's benefited as well from those movements.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's vital, and for me, the stories are a huge part of it. And I notice so often that that's the key joy of exchanging seed rather than buying seed, is that there's suddenly like more room for the stories that you've been told when you first got the seed, but also your story of the seed, you know, like your experience growing it and cooking with it. And it's less of a, I don't know, it feels fuller, it feels deeper somehow, the whole experience of working with the seed then, rather than something that you've like paid for. And it like slightly less utilitarian, slightly more sort of, you're now looking after the seed. And for me, part of that is then when you pass the seed on, you're also telling the story on. There's some sort of like onus of storytelling, I think. Richard, do you have any? Oh, sorry, no, go for it, Rowan.
Well, I was just gonna pass it on to Dee and Richard again, but I was wondering, one of the challenges we I guess we already have, but we will have as we kind of absorb again these stories, is how to kind of store them, how to make them not just available again to people, but how to, do they need to be preserved in some way? is it just a case of passing it on word of mouth, you know, passing it down generations? I'd be really intrigued to know what Dee and Richard, if they have thoughts on how we might do that.
Dee, do you want to go first? We break up the order a bit.
Yeah. So, you know, like with Isaiah, I know when he first started, he was just saving seed, and, you know, he wasn't really connecting to anyone. And when I met him, and I met him in Liverpool and not in London, and, you know, we were talking about this shark fin melon that had this story, and seed had been saved from sort of 20 years ago, and how important it was to have community and to be able to share these seeds, and, you know, to have the proper equipment and everything else. But community was the most important part. The networking and the sharing of information was the most important part of doing that. The seed conditions, all of that. And, you know, he sort of actually changed what he was doing. So instead of sending out a pack of seeds that was all mixed up, you know, he started really cataloging things. And I think there's something that us as seed savers and, you know, the Sedum Food Bank can do. It is education. That sort of wider education within communities, so that they understand just how important and crucial the work that they are doing. You know, it's not just that they're saving seeds to grow some food for next year. You're saving seeds in terms of not just our food security, but our food sovereignty. And especially now with the climate emergency, which has been around for 30 years and, you know, has sort of literally eliminated species and varieties around other parts of the world, right? But, you know, we're losing varieties here in Europe. So we have a crucial role to play. So just as we want every child to, you know where their food comes from, I think every child should know how to save a couple of varieties of seed.
Yeah, that's nice. You know, I think the stories are so important, and they're quite often what draw people to the seed bank or to our work. But I mean, I'm also slightly kind of wary of kind of romanticizing it sometimes, and particularly when it's other people's stories, right? And particularly, you know, kind of migrant stories where it's kind of, I'm looking for that, you know, oh, tell me about, you know, how important this seed is for you, because I know that how powerful that is. And there is something else that's interesting. So OJ, who was in the film, who's a kind of neighbor of mine, and I know she, you know, she describes in the film how seed saving is so much, it's kind of natural, you know, just she grew up doing seed saving, right? And having hands in the soil reminds her of being at home. But when it came to varieties, it was quite interesting that she wasn't particularly focused on varieties. So she gave me some seeds and like, what are they? What are they? You know, what's the story? Like, oh, big tomatoes. I don't know, big tomatoes. Yeah, and then we got a small one, and it was like, and I think it was because it was, you know, she hadn't kind of made it exotic. It was just ordinary for her. It was just part of her gardening. And then we started, because a few of us were getting interested, we ended up naming. So the Mamadoli pumpkin tomato is a new name, right? That emerged when she started talking to people at the allotment about it. And so, you know, the kids said they look like pumpkins, so they got the pumpkin, and then Mamadoli's a sister. So the story emerged, and I kind of felt initially like, oh, we're fabricating mythology here or something. But you know, when we look at the seed bank, some of you might know, we've sort of set up a database to try and kind of track some of the seed varieties and how they come into the seed bank and how they leave and their kind of popularity. So we kind of track the relationship between the growers, the growing spaces, the varieties, and the seed batches. And so one reason for doing that, I think, is to kind of challenge some of the assumptions we make about varieties and their kind of popularity and stuff. And it's probably a bit too early to say, but I'm convinced that the data is starting to show us already that the varieties that have good names and a good description on them are more popular, right? So the requests we're getting year on year are increasing where there's a good backstory, or really, you know, a crack, like Cherokee Trail of Tears is a kind of like, you know, the history steeped in that, in the description of the way that bean variety was carried by people, you know, their survival is wrapped up in that story, and it's one of the most popularly requested varieties. So I think what that tells us is, you know, if we know that seeds that have good names and good stories travel further, then maybe it's okay that part of our work is in weaving those stories and continuing to kind of add that layer of meaning into them, because it's part of what we do to kind of help the seed to travel. And so, yeah, I think, again, in an urban context, I mean, you know, there are storytellers everywhere, but that's certainly something that we can play a role in doing, I think.
Do either of you have a response to that? I feel aware of a slight time lag in Zoom and not wanting to.
I just really like this idea of, I guess I'm interested, I also am wary of I think we all nodded at that point when you mentioned this like caution about romanticizing seed stories and seed histories. And I also I'm really excited by the idea of inventing stories, because that's all stories are, is just inventions like retold and passed down. And I guess I'd quite like to think about that a little bit more, and maybe what kind of new stories we might invent with Glasgow Seed Library, which is just a fiction in itself. I'd love to think more about both the stories of seeds that come to us, but some of them do come to us without much, you know. They've arrived without a huge amount of data about, you know, maybe we know where they were grown in Glasgow, but we don't know where they were before that. And sometimes it's exciting to, okay, let's see what happens. Like, let's see what grows.
I wonder if that's it. I mean, that's a challenge for seed networks everywhere. Those questions of where is seed coming from, how's it been grown, etc. But I wonder if it's particularly a challenge in urban spaces. Like thinking of seed quality, I guess, and thinking of like the importance as like stewarding seed collections in really knowing what it is that you're looking after and passing on. And that I'm thinking isolation distances is a particular challenge in urban spaces. And so that the record keeping is quite important, but so is maybe the experimental aspect of it as well. You know, I think, Richard, we have discussions a lot about how to ensure highest quality seed and all of that. But I think perhaps part of the joy also is just trying things out and things going wrong. I mean, yeah, that's part of that process as well, a bit of a playfulness.
Yeah, and you know, the most exciting, you know, it's really difficult if you're a seed bank, you get seed with very little information with it, and you're kind of thinking like, what is this, you know, kind of, but it's also sometimes the most exciting, you know, 3 beans left on the table at a seed swap with nothing, no information at all, and you can't help but go, oh yeah, but just maybe, you know, like maybe it's something, you know, like nobody knows you left it, nothing, that's the one you're going to go for and kind of grow it out just in case. So yeah, sometimes no information is the most tempting of all to kind of but yeah, sorry, what was the question?
I'm not sure there was a question.
No,
but I feel aware that I
yeah.
think he was about to jump in with something. That's what I was speaking.
Yeah, so coming back to that whole thing around romanticism, I think for the communities, you know, I'm in and working with, we're trying to fill gaps you know, because there's been so much that has been lost. So when we do get stories, those are stories that sort of build our own sort of personal and community resilience. So last night I was talking with our project coordinator who's Lebanese, and she was saying, but I don't know what our traditional seeds are. I don't know what our, you know, traditional sort of foodways in terms of farming are. Why? Because for particular certain generations of Lebanese people, you know, they just have to flee, or they've been living under sort of violence. So, you know, for me, that's where stories are important. That's where communities and diaspora are important. You know, it's like, right, we're on a mission now. We are going to find those stories, and we are going to find those seeds, because they do exist somewhere. So it's not romanticism a lot of time. Yeah, it's about healing, I think, for a lot of people.
Absolutely, I really hear that. And I wonder if it also points to something that Charlotte of the Freedom Seed Bank mentioned in the film, when she said that like saving seed as a practice is a way also of recognizing the labor that's gone into keeping varieties alive, and the like hard work of growers for centuries and centuries to like produce what it is that we're eating now. There's some sort of like, there's a recognition of the work that's gone into the carrot that we're eating, that also feels important as a, yeah, you need to acknowledge the story in order to acknowledge that, for me.
Yeah, I was just sort of aware of that when we were talking about naming. So when, I mean, mentioned in the opening, I breed a bit of lettuce in the backyard, and you know, it's quite fun inventing names for that. But you know, I'm quite aware that I might be crossing two lettuces, and coming, you know, this takes a while. It takes a few generations, kind of sixth and seventh generation now on the bloody marble. But I'm aware that, you know, you're still crossing two things that has been, you know, hundreds of years of plant breeders, or you know, people saving the seed and you know, continuing to adapt it. And you know, when I started out, I had this sense of like, you either save seed and preserve it and keep it absolutely pure, you know, and crossing it with something like transgressive that is just like going against that. But actually, it's much more on a kind of spectrum than that, right? Because by saving it, by maintaining the variety in a particular way, the amount that you kind of rogue out the odd ones, or kind of allow it to be a little bit of a wider gene pool by not being so selective. I mean, without getting too much into the kind of inbreeders and outbreeders, it depends on what crop you're talking about. But it's fascinating, I think, that space when you start being certainly comfortable and looking for a wider genetic diversity within a variety and within species, that whole act of custodianship of seed, that's something that is a little bit dynamic as well. Yeah, it's kind of really a fascinating area. And something, yeah, no, nothing to add to that. Good place to start. Yeah.
I was just going to mention something someone's popped in the chat. Maya's put Vivian Sansura's Palestine Heirloom Seed Library into the chat. I recommend, yeah, people go and take a look. It was one of the, I know it was one of the inspirations behind Glasgow Seed Library. And yeah, just really vital work, saving seed that might otherwise be lost forever. Yeah, that was all.
Oh my gosh, and definitely worth looking up and following if you don't know about them yet. And Vivian is brilliant. I think what she's single-handedly done also in just raising awareness about the importance of local seed collections and seed diversity is huge. You know, in the last few years, I think it's really, yeah, she's brilliant and worth keeping an eye on, definitely. to take us in a slightly different direction for a moment, Dee and Richard, you both do or have worked in the context of household food insecurity. And I wonder how you see urban seed networks as part of that work, or those movements for just food systems. Yeah. I guess because it's not often a connection that's explicitly drawn. You know, I think those two quite lively movements, but not necessarily with that much crossover. I think you two are both folks working in that space.
I think because my background is, you know, from community food production, from farming, I've always seen a connection, and understand that, you know, people are hungry in the UK because of poverty, but there's a whole, you know, food systems to be providing access to affordable food, to culturally appropriate food. So this is where our seed saving and our diversity in seeds comes into play, and is incredibly important. So like in our garden, we, grow varieties that reflect the sort of diversity of the area, and people are allowed to go and pick what they want, as long as they leave some, or they respect the sign that says seed saving. Do not break this plant or destroy it. So for me, that is really, really important. And I think the next level is that we have enough quality seed to be scaling across and scaling up, because I don't think a community garden can actually feed a neighborhood. We need community farms, and that's some work I've been doing over the last year around sort of community food resilience and connecting farmers with communities, and sort of those communities and organizations and farmers talking about what do you want to eat and what can we produce for you. In an urban setting, that has proven to be very difficult, especially London, because we don't have that many sort of community peri-urban farms that are big enough to do that work. But it is happening. There's Wolves Lane, who's been doing brilliant works with Black Roots and the Roots into Food Growing project. Granville, we're just starting a farm as well, and looking to scale up some of those things. But it comes back to us having those seeds to begin with, and understanding how to grow those plants, which we wouldn't know if we don't have people in the community telling us how to do that. So we're only mitigating household food insecurity.
Yeah, it's it's a massive subject. And I think, I kind of worked with Pembroke House and a food hub during COVID, where kind of big emergency response. And I think coming out of that, we're now trying to do, I think you mentioned kind of neighborhood food model work that we're doing. I think one of the things that's been such a challenge is that because of the massive increase in emergency food supply, a lot of the now focus has shifted into very short-term kind of measures to meet that food insecurity, which is necessary. But it's much harder in some ways to get into the space of actually therefore needing to challenge the food system and develop local food systems, because it can seem like those two things are in conflict. And I think where seed plays a role in that is if you're when you're starting to look at, you know, neighborhood food systems, where you might be looking for like an increase in neighborhood activity in food production, and perhaps in the areas of, you know, food preparation, food distribution as well, then, you know, seed is an example where it's kind of, you can already do it at scale, right? People are kind of, you know, you're talking to people about this neighborhood food system like it's totally pie in the sky, it could never happen. And then you're like, oh yeah, and by the way, you know, we already produce enough seed in my, you know, 4 by 10 meter backyard in Walworth for the whole of South London, right? I mean, genuinely, like there is enough lettuce seed there for everyone. So there is, and by the way, we've got a network of 170 gardeners, you know, involved. Like it shows that this stuff is possible in a way that I think can help with the other bits. But I mean, as with always, the massive challenge is access to land, and it just comes back to access to land and who owns the land. But you know, it gives us more influence and more power to be kind of arguing for the necessity of that being turned over to food production. So yeah. Sorry for my abrupt finishes. I feel like I should get a better skilled speaker at sort of like going, and so, you know, but I just run out of road and it just stops. Right?
Yeah, but yeah, I thoroughly agree with you. Land and access to land is a barrier. You know, Granville has been looking for land for years. You know, they're also barriers in terms of accessing resources, money, equipment, you know, sort of inputs you need to do particular crops as well. Farming is not cheap. You know, paying people as well, because we can't build a food system on volunteers. So, and then we have issues around race and gender as well that impact on who can access land, and education as well. There's a lack of education, and for me, I'll always stress education. So from seed to plates, to compost, you know, we do need to have different types of education to meet people's different learning needs. Yeah. So yeah, we need to change something. We need to be, you know, challenging our local authorities to be opening up. There's land. I just muted myself. There's land, but we just need that political will and to shift our local authorities thinking from thinking, well, you know, that piece of land I could sell for several million. No, all right, we need to be investing in people and not just selling things off and not commodifying things. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're in the situation we are in. We've commodified seed and we've commodified land, we've commodified our food, and to some extent, we've commodified people, and especially people from the global south.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of potential alignment between the seed sovereignty movement and the movement that's really gaining a lot of steam and increasing traction around land justice in the UK, that I feel really inspired by. And I feel like this is really part of the same conversation, and would love to work out how we work together, what that looks like. And I really agree with you, Dee, about the role of local governments in supporting these movements. I'm part of a group called the Garden of Earthly Delights that grows on a bit of land in London, in Hackney, if you know London. That was originally a sort of guerrilla gardening collective, and it was in our first iteration. We built a garden on a bit of land that had been a derelict parking lot for about 7 years, that the council owned along a really polluted road in Hackney, but there's no onus for developers to do anything with that. You know, you can just sit on land for years and years. It's been earmarked for some sort of future development, but it's so hard to secure it either as a meanwhile space for growing, but also as you mentioned, in a longer term sense. It's such a struggle, and it's a permanent struggle for community gardens in cities. It feels sort of relentless. Every garden I know is in a bit of a battle about also about long leases, which I think is relevant for seed saving and growing anything. You know, a year doesn't really cut it so well. We need time, and that's, I think, in particular why that sort of connection is important. And it's a nice segue, actually, because I wanted to ask you all how you think urban seed networks could be better supported by local government or national government, perhaps. What your ideas might be on that. No pressure, quite a big question.
It's funny, I hadn't really thought of that before. It hadn't really occurred to me that they would have a role to play, which is unusual because, if you think about local government, the access to land is the thing, but if you take South London, you know, we've got a massive amount of housing, council-owned housing land there, and you know, on one hand, we have in Southwark, you know, quite an active public health team who want to support, you know, with grant funding, food growing. At the same time as you're having a conversation with them about, you know, how they might support some ground project, the grounds maintenance teams come in and just like hack to the ground, you know, all our cherry trees that have been kind of like, you know, established for 20 years, like to a stump. And it's just, you know, they're only doing what was asked of them, but they're tidying up, you know, because that's what the residents in the past want, or that's what the housing officer said, you know. And it's just like a long, and it kind of happens time and time again. It's kind of, you know, that's the process. Like, okay, right, can we get the grounds maintenance manager here? Can we get the ecology officer down? Can we get the tree officer down? Because once, you know, and it's just different bits of the council not being joined up. And you know, I don't want to sit here and bitch about the council because it's like, you know, you all have your own gripes, right? And we need councils, right? I'm not going to say we don't, but there is, I think, a massive opportunity to do stuff with the existing council land, right? I'm not talking about sign it over to community groups who then need sole ownership and quite a lot of responsibility. But if you think about seed gardens from a sort of, you know, slightly more wild seed gardens, the thing that we started doing as soon as we turned over some of our community garden areas to be more kind of interested in the seed crops that might come if we left stuff, is we were messing around with it less, right? In the early days, like, oh, that's gone, we'll whip that out and kind of tidy that up and stick something else in. So gardens where you're a bit more kind of relaxed about seed saving, letting things go to seed, interested to see what will come in late in the season, you know, they're great for biodiversity. They're much kind of less intensively managed spaces. We could have, you know, the whole of South London could be like that, right? There's kind of, the space is there. And actually, you know, in terms of kind of the management costs for the council, it wouldn't necessarily be more, but it's just bringing people together, a little bit of education, it's working with the team so that they kind of, and changing public perception as well, because I know, you know, that doing that bit, it's like, okay, we always take the weeds out around the edge, you know, you mow a little bit around the edge if you want to grow the grass long, so it still looks cared for, so people don't think that it's been neglected. Nobody wants to live in a place that doesn't feel cared for, but maybe somewhere that feels cared for begins to look a little bit different.
Can I just jump in after you there, Richard? Hi everyone.
Yes.
I'm sort of picking up, I'm completely relating to what everybody's saying in different ways. I'm very new to seed saving, the actual principle of seed saving, the sovereignty. I sort of opened an initiative, the school seed bank on a whim, mainly because a lot to do with what Dee was saying. I believe that there is a massive, there's a big problem coming up with the generational loss of information. Especially I work in a school, I'm a school cook, a primary school cook in my paid job. So, and I also am chair for an allotment site here in County Durham. So I sort of see it from all angles. With the allotment side, the council land locally here in County Durham, I suppose we're a lot better off than a lot of people who are more southern constituencies in city centres, built up. A lot of yourselves, I suppose, are from London area. Here in County Durham, we're still very lucky to have a lot more open green space available to us. But from an allotment point of view, I mean, I keep expressing to the local councils here that we now have a waiting list of 60 plus people. I mean, that's quite small. Our waiting list is quite small. I can imagine that there's some other, again, southern, more centralised areas. I can only imagine the people, you know, how many people are trying to get allotments. It's very sad because the council's opinion around here is let's palm off those allotments, and they're not interested in them anymore. They don't want to put any funding into them. We personally don't get any, we're not entitled to a lot of the funding options because we're council owned land, which sort of ties our hands there. There is small funding pots available, but I think there's a big gap, north-south divide when it comes to gardening and the trend. We all know how much people want to get on board now with growing their own sustainable lives, again, seed sovereignty, but it's being lost, and it needs to be recaptured in our schools. From what we were saying before, it's so important that this sort of thing gets into the curriculum, you know, so that it does get some of this money that's floating around in the air, you know, that we all pay towards where it should be, teaching our children what they need to know. Yeah, so much. I jumped in at a very late time in the conversation because I just suddenly got all excited about what everyone was saying, but everyone's coming from a different place, but we all are coming to the same point. So it's brilliant to hear. I'd love to keep in touch with a lot of you and hear about what everybody's doing. And this year, I've been very proud. I'm running this seed bank on my own. But I have managed to now hit 346 schools from today, since I started in 2021. So what I wanted to say to you all is there's a lot going on in schools. Teachers are taking the initiative themselves. They're not waiting anymore for the government to give them the money that they need. There are a lot of people in schools dying, crying out for this information to pass on to children. So I find that very positive, and I think it's going to happen from what everybody's been saying. It's happening already, so very excited. Anyway, sorry, I've skipped all over because there's that much I could say, you know. I don't know where to start and finish, so I shall finish there, but
oh my gosh, please don't apologize, Pip. That's incredible. My gosh, in 1 year, how much you've managed to achieve.
From March 21, I started in lockdown. A bit like everybody else, it made me reevaluate significantly our food systems and how unstable they are, and food wasn't on the shelves. And I was very lucky. I was brought up by my grandparents, and my life was foraging, growing our own, making wines at home, you know, had wines on the shelves, things hanging up, seeds were being saved by Gran. So I'm lucky, but I'm very aware that probably my generation, I'm 42, but my generation, friends who I know haven't got this information, and they look at me and sort of, how do you know that? And I think, dear me, there was a big gap, and it's getting worse now. We haven't got the grandparents that probably we all had. The grandparents of this generation, it's not so much about sustainable lifestyles as material lifestyles, as you all know. So yeah,
I think you're right to point to a real shift that happened at the start of the pandemic in interest in seed, which I think really came from like a mainstream awareness of the fragility of the food system. I think exactly as you say, Pip, this seeing empty shelves in supermarkets is really scary. And I think that yeah, we noticed in the Seed Sovereignty Programme with some of the companies, the small ethical seed companies we work with, a jump in demand of 600%, one of them reported, year on year to the year before. Because folks were growing food for the first time, but also I think that was coming from a place of fear for many about, or awareness of the food system, which is tricky, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I'm like, welcome people, let's like talk about seeds. But on the other hand, it's it's bittersweet, isn't it? Because it's about it when it comes from a place of fear and of worry about where we're going in terms of food systems, that yeah has a different sort of taste. Your work with schools is brilliant, and it's definitely something that I would love to know more about. So I'll get in touch if that's all right.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Again, what I truly believe that we've lost touch with the seasonal vegetables, seasonal cycles, that we should, Dee, again, you were saying, you know, culturally appropriate foods, we've completely lost it. You know, the foods grow at a certain time seasonally, and that is when we should eat them. We shouldn't be forcing foods to grow in foreign, in national, you know, internationally, and drawing them all in. We need to get back to what we can do in our own gardens, our own green spaces, to sort of become more sustainable again for ourselves. You know,
absolutely.
Sorry, I've got an 8-year-old behind you all holding up notes because I've been ignoring her for that long. She's now writing notes and holding them up behind me.
It's a good invitation to open the floor in the last few minutes we have left. We've been talking and talking, and I'd love to hear from you all. There's a question from, so please pop them in the chat. There's a question from Nick Fife. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Saying, for those of us who might be interested in starting seed libraries in our areas, do you have any tips or resources about the actual processes and logistics behind running a library? Nick, do you want to add anything to that, or are you happy for us to just ask our speakers directly?
That was it. Hi, sorry, I've been muted and had my camera off, but that was the whole question. That was the whole question. Great. Okay. Dee, Richard, Rowan. It's a big question. Maybe like top level tips. What are all the mistakes, perhaps?
I think there's so many. It's really hard to. I don't think there's any. Well, maybe Richard and Dee will do a better job, but I guess the one thing I would say, when we really started to work out what to do with the seed library, was understanding that it wasn't just about looking after the seeds, which is really important, and there's a lot of effort goes into looking after the seeds, both in their stored or collected form and once they're in the ground, but it's also about looking after people. So I think attend to your community. Who's going to be growing these seeds? Who wants to grow seeds? Who could benefit from the seed library? And I just, in my head, I always just have those things in mind, that seeds and people are the most important thing. Richard and Dee might have some more logistical tips. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's the most important thing. But coming back to the previous question, you know, we do, you know, Save and Seed is part of the revolution. It's part of, you know, our movement for agroecology and food sovereignty. But we still need environment that's enabling. And so we need to get our local government, we need to get our national governments on board. And, you know, because as Helene said, you know, a lot of times we're threatened with the loss of our spaces, be it buildings, be it our gardens. It is often difficult to continue and to, you know, move projects and move seeds. So I think that's really, really important as well, that we get some commitment and buy-in from our local authorities in terms of us building that healthy food system. All right, so we at Granville, we've been fighting development for years. It's going ahead. We now have to lift our garden and move it somewhere else in the community because they're building over it. But yeah. All right, so in the interim, where do we put things? So yeah. So we need to be working, you know, with our local councillors who are supportive and who understand the importance of the work we're doing.
Absolutely. Richard, I wonder if you have any, from a London Freedom Seed Bank perspective, any top level tips to share?
Back to the tips. Well, yeah, I was going to say what Rowan said, really. People. It's always about the people. I mean, what we like at London Freedom Seed Bank is kind of quite nice to, you know, just have a bit of distributed kind of decision making, a bit of just distribute the tasks, try and avoid, you know, you've got the space and the time, don't rush it, take the time to kind of make sure you've got a little bit, can build a little bit of a team and look up after each other and try and, you know, because that's what makes it fun and kind of enjoyable and you know, rewarding, and not too dependent on any, you know, one person, so that you can step out and step back in again, and the thing will keep itself going. Yeah, I'm a bit of a sucker for keeping records and data, so enjoyed that. There might be some with the Airtable we built, we kind of sharing that around a little bit as a kind of a tool for kind of keeping track of things. Not for everyone, but you know, it gives me a certain level of satisfaction, and it gives a certain visibility to what you've got, because sometimes it can feel kind of, you know, I can show you a box full of envelopes, but and that's nice as well. The kind of physicality of the seed is really satisfying, but it doesn't sometimes capture the kind of the wider networks and the conversations. So yeah, I think we covered it really. Come and go for it, enjoy it, have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Richard, your point about groups is important, because so many of us are working in the context of no funding. Most community seed initiatives I know are unfunded, or with very little funding. And so actually how you organize from the beginning is really important in terms of longevity and resilience. And the London Freedom Seed Bank, I mean, has been going for now 10 years almost. And I think that's in part because of its quite distributed organizing. It's so easy that projects, and I think this is relevant to all community projects, are like spearheaded by one really enthusiastic, super engaged person. But I guess then who's doing this all sort of on a volunteer basis off their own back. But it feels like it's kind of quite ripe for burnout or for overwhelm. And also what happens if like life happens, you know, and there are other demands elsewhere. And mainly these are folks that also have a family or full-time job, or as many of us in this field, like several jobs. You know, I think it's a lot more fun with others, because there's like the social aspect is really important, and maybe chance of your project going on for many years is also hopefully increased accordingly. Let me see if there are any more questions in the group.
I was just going to mention one other thing I was thinking about that would really help, because I think there's a couple of people in the chat maybe setting up seed projects or working on new seed projects, is like finding your collaborators, like finding your, finding your fellow, and I don't mean just other seeds people, but you know, yeah, working with schools and maybe the teachers within those schools who are really excited about seed saving, working with community food initiatives who, yeah, really want to also grow some seeds in their plots. Yeah, looking at all the different people you can partner with, I think that has made Glasgow Seed Library, because it doesn't exist without all those other people and all those other movements as well. So a lot of the stuff that Dee has been talking about, are really important issues and access to land and community growing. Yeah, so many big problems, but we can work together and we can change things. I think a seed library on its own, I actually don't know if it can do that much, but I think working with other people, we can really change things.
I just wanted to chime in really quick. I'm James. I'm actually out in Vancouver in Canada, and so it's interesting, just listening to the entire conversation. And one of the things that I came across today, and this was actually it was an article written March 14th, 2022 by Reuters, and it says World Bank's Malpass, which is the CEO, warns against food hoarding warns against hoarding of food and gas. And so in my experience, whenever the World Bank says not to worry, we are not going to have a market crash, fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, and get out of your stocks. All right. So as a matter of fact, we've sort of moved everything out of the stocks because the market is heading down. But when they say don't hoard food, it's because we are heading in that direction. And it's, you got to, anything you hear in the media, do the opposite. And, one of the things that I'm hearing in the conversation is, the lack of land, and it's kind of the same thing we have around here. And a lot of our farming is urban farming. We do have a bunch of smaller farms, and some of the municipalities have actually allowed people to build bigger houses on the farms and use, and now there's less farmland. And I think with reading this article today, it just has me realize that we have to up our urgency. I'm going to be upping my urgency and having more conversations with more people about what is going on, what I see. And there actually isn't a shortage of food in the world. It's just we have globalists that are deliberately creating these shortages because they want to, cripple the system. They want to, there's a whole underworld to what's going on, as I'm sure most of you know on this conversation. But I think the thing of it is that a lot of people are sort of not really wanting to talk about that. And I think we just have to be forthright and upfront and let people know that we are we're on a crash course right now. History is repeating itself. My grandfather, my grandfather grew up in Poland and Europe at a time in, when it was run by the Bolsheviks, by Stalin, right? Where there were food shortages, they were in lineups. And so this is, this is not something new. They're just repeating this process because they've found it, obviously, that it works perhaps. If we're in fact going on this crash course, we have to ask, how bad will it get? Will people intervene? But I mean, we've got all these, all of us, all of you who are saving seed, growing seed, sharing seed. We've been saving seed for about 10 years out here in Vancouver. I have a lot of tomato seeds. I have 150 varieties. And we just been, growing and keeping and saving. And I sort of have my sort of core 25 varieties that I keep growing. But I call them sort of my massive producer. So they're the ones that, will get 2, 3, 4 pounds. They're your Italian tomatoes, where, you put in 10 plants like that and you'll get, 50 or 100 pounds of tomatoes. But I think it's really important for us to have these hard conversations with people, with more people, and just, enroll them, I guess is the word, enroll them in allowing us to have access to this land and enrolling our community. I know people don't want to work for free, but at the end of the day, when there's a shortage of food, and if we have the seed and they have the manpower, I think we really got to, come together as a community to really, to up the urgency around food security and the continuation of, saving seed, especially to our areas, as everyone has suggested, seed that is adapted, acclimatized to our specific areas. So important. So thank you for putting this on as well. This is great. I kind of peruse the different aspects of Eventbrite, and in my local area, there aren't many conversations of this, like this. So I'm on different Zoom calls around the world constantly around food, and we actually run a program out here where we teach people who live in apartments how to grow food. So a lot of these people, you ask them, what a worm is, and they're like, what's that, right? They don't know anything about, bugs and worms and growing food. And so we get them on a call. We pair them up with homeowners that don't have land, or I should say for homeowners that have land. The apartment dweller doesn't have land. So we partner them up. We, build them a bed, and we we teach them how to grow food, and people are excited and growing their own food, and it just starts. You know, we've just started. We started this program 2 years ago, and we're just building the momentum. And every year there's a few more and a few more. And I think first year was 25. Last year we had close to 100, you know, participants and families. This year I think we're going to aim for 500. And so we're just out to, what does the saying go? Fish for a person, you'll feed them for a day, and teach them how to fish, and you'll feed them for life. So really that's our focus at this point. So thank you. And thank you for allowing me to jump on and rant.
Can you send us some tomato seed, James? Send us your biggest, best tomato, right? And then when it gets really bad, I'll be like, I remember the day we were on a call and that guy James said it was going to get really bad, or it won't get bad, and then we'll say, no, it's fine, he was wrong.
I'll tell you what. I'll put our website in the chat, my email address, and you can send me an email, and I'll email you some or I'll mail you some seeds.
We can see some illegal seed swapping cross borders. Yeah.
I'm not listening to anything.
I actually sent some seeds to a friend of mine I sent some seeds to a friend in Nigeria, but they never made it to him. So
folks, I'm very aware of the time, but I would love to put in a cheeky final question. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. But I'm also aware that it's Thursday evening, and folks probably want to finally close some screens. But I'd love to ask one more question, which is that as we've discussed seed saving as a way of keeping alive varieties that are important to us, but it's also a way of building crop diversity into the future. And I do really pointed to this about looking after future generations, and it's a way of really ensuring food system resilience for the future. And I guess my closing question to you three is, when you imagine urban food futures, what could be the role of seed in that, or seed networks? Any ideas? Or anyone else on the call, if you have thoughts. I guess the vision for me is that every local community has their own seed store, their own collection of seeds that are significant to them, that are meeting their cultural and also very practical food needs, and that those are linked. You know, so I also work at the Freedom Seed Bank, and we're almost at the stage where we're thinking, actually, one collection for the whole of London is maybe it's inadequate. You know, maybe we want to be going really local. Maybe we want to be supporting specific collections in certain parts of London with specific growing conditions or with specific cultural needs. You know, it gets really exciting when you can start to get really local, I think, and really specific. What's also connecting across the city, across cities, across the UK and across the world. I think that feels really exciting to me.
Yeah, I would agree. That's also like I've been asked, what is the future of Glasgow Seed Library? And I've sort of said ideally to disappear, because there'll just be seeds sowing and growing and saving happening everywhere, all across the city, like you said, every neighborhood, people growing what they want to grow, what they want to eat, what they want to have in their lives. And I think we have some work to get to that point, particularly around education, as Dee has pointed out, and building up that skills, recovering lost knowledge. But I think it's possible. And I want it to be an everyday part of what everyone does. An everyday part of living in a city is that you're saving your seeds.
Yeah, someone just put into the chat comments and I was like, yes. Food for me should be a commons, seeds should be a commons, land should be a commons. And I, see a future where we have that, and where every community has this strong resilient food system where everyone can eat healthy, good food that's culturally appropriate. Yeah. And so seed is an important sort of pillar of that. And, you know, it'll be biodiverse, contributing to climate resilience, creating jobs as well, because we should be paying people. So that's the future I see.
I agree totally with that. I have nothing to add. That is, I think, a great point on which to finish. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sign me up to that future. I'm definitely in. Thank you so much, folks. Thanks in particular to our three speakers, Richard, Dee, and Rowan, for taking so much time to share with us tonight your thoughts and your experiences. I've got so much I'm mulling on already, and so many more questions I want to ask, and I'm sure participants do as well, and I want to do more of this. I want more spaces where we can talk about this. So perhaps that's where we go with this. Thanks so much also to the rest of you for joining us tonight. It's been really great having you here and seeing the chat, seeing you all share your own experiences and questions. Sorry for not being able to include more questions. Yeah, let's do it again soon. I'll share tomorrow or in the coming days a recording of this with the captions and perhaps with some more resources from our three speakers, and an invitation to our Community Seed Forum, which is a space where community groups can share their experiences. It's a peer-to-peer learning space, and our next one is on the 31st of March, and you're all heartily invited. I'll share more on that in the coming days. Great, thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you. Really great conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
cheers all.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
for
Bye.
hosting. Thanks for coming.
All right.
Is anyone saving the chat?
Yep, I'm
Yeah,
on the chat.
Yeah,
on the chat.
lots of emails and websites.
Yeah, definitely. Much to gosh, yeah, many connections to follow up on and much to think about. Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you to Charlie also for managing the chat and sending over.
No problem.
And it's quite hard to do when you're
Yeah.
It's great to have other folks on hand.
That was lovely.
Thanks
It
for
was
having
really
me.
lovely.
I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Mm.
All right, and seeds. Yeah, got them bringing. So seeds are literally a global topic right now. Yeah.
It's both the time of year and the moment, sort of politically, I think, to be
Yeah.
really shouting about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's great to finally meet you, Rowan. I feel like I've been moving online for a while, but it's nice to put a face.
Yeah, I've been to so many Zooms where you've been. I've not. Yeah, I didn't even realise we hadn't met. Dee, it was really interesting to hear about your idea, the kind of urban farms project that you're working on.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is that part of Granville community, or is it something else? Is that another?
So the farm was starting as part of Granville Community Kitchen. I also work for Land Workers Alliance. So we've been doing like that community food resilience project for what, just over a year. Yeah. And for a lot of people, they are seed savers as well. You know, we have to be interdependent. We can't just be in our little silos anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to connect the dots. Yeah.
Yeah, look to you for inspiration. I know there's people in Glasgow trying to get hold of enough land that you could call it a farm. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we've been patchwork farming little plots of land. Yeah, which is the growing communities model. Yeah.
Patchwork farming.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Yeah, I suppose, should we all go? Should we go home? Oh no, we are home, but.
Do you think Richard got the email that he was being called back to Peterborough? And I don't know if he left it just before he got that email was put in the.
Back to Peterborough. I've saved the chat, so I'll pass it.
Right. Yeah. I just
specific invite for him. All right, folks.
All right.
I think maybe let's call it.
Yeah.
I think we all deserve a break. Thank you so much for joining. I think there's lots here. Let's do stuff with it. Maybe
Yeah.
Great. I'll follow up with you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the inspiration.
Have a lovely evening.
Same to you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.